Hello, how are you all doing today? My name is Ryan Scheiding, and today I'm going to talk to you about Japanese ghosts or Yūrei, monsters or yokai. That's not a perfect translation, but it'll do for our purposes today, and historical game world building. Unlike some of the other things I've talked about in this series, this is a very early conception of a project. So the last time I talked here, it was something that I was actually writing a draft for and was about to submit for publication, whereas this is the very, very early conception stage of a game that I am making. So as such, I have a strict talk outline for myself here, where I'm going to talk about the project. I'm going to talk about some historical research I've been doing, my design inspirations, and then I'm going to talk about some of the actual design process or conception process here, where why is this not a historical game? Some abandoned materials, because despite the fact that I'm in early development of this game, I was going back through some of my notes and I started in 2021. Then I'm going to talk about creating a history-based narrative and world, and then my iterative design schedule. So I will take you through that today. So to start, to define this project, I am making a detective ghost game based on historical research in Japanese folklore. This is a project that I've wanted to work on for a while. As I was saying, started development sometime in 2021. And then looking back on some of the things that I'm using sources, I realized that some of these are books that I read like 15 years ago. So I am excited to be working on this. And today you're going to hear a bit of a pitch because what I'm trying to do is put together some sort of a coherent idea to convince some people to work with me. And just being like, I want to make a detective ghost game is intriguing, but usually not enough to convince tenure track academics that they have time to work on a thing. So what I'm going to do is to start by talking about some of the research that I've been doing. So my background is, before I started making games, was in history. And it's something that's why I make historical games. I'm still interested in the discipline, but it's just kind of not what I wanted to do as an academic. So I blend it in when I can in the work that I do. So I have all of this historical knowledge from being an undergrad and a history master's student and just kind of sitting around all these old notes, all of this information. And it helps me to think through some of the ideas and problems when I am writing stuff. Obviously, when we're talking about my work with atomic bombing representation, of course there's history there, but there's a bunch of other stuff too. So in just trying to learn about Japanese culture, one thing that I became really interested in was Japanese ghost stories and monster stories, or Yūrei and Yōkai. So for this game, I decided to try and blend these two. Because I want to make a game that is significant and educational, but is not your traditional educational style game. So some of the historical events that I'll be focusing on are the Battle of Iwo Jima, Battle of New Guinea, the sinking of the battleship Yamato, and then the thing that really inspired me years and years and years ago. This is the book that I read 15 years ago. Our last letters of kamikaze pilots. So for those of you who, I'm sure you've all heard of kamikaze pilots, but historically at the end of the war, when they were recruiting kamikaze pilots, they kind of came in three waves. So the first wave of kamikaze pilots were people who were very good pilots, who were super motivated, believed in everything that was being pitched to them by their government, and really, really wanted to be kamikaze pilots. Very passionate people. Then there was this second wave, which was essentially pilots that were not chosen in the first wave. So they were also really adamant and very, I don't want to use excited, but very passionate about the opportunity to be kamikaze pilots. But the third wave of kamikaze pilots were actually drafted university students. University students hadn't been drafted, hadn't been included in the armed forces for much of Japan's war, which was unlike the American War, which started, 1941-ish, or the European War, which you could say starts in 1939 or even a little bit earlier. Japan had been at war since 1931, so it was this 15-year period of constant warfare. But it was not until the very end of the war in 1944, 1945 that they finally drafted university students. So a lot of this final wave of kamikaze pilots were drafted university students who, ironically, I guess you could say, a lot of them were like Western philosophy majors. So when they were writing their last letters, they were doing things like quoting Descartes and talking about like existentialism, or even like writing about like Plato and these sorts of things. So these last letters homes were always so interesting to me, because you have some of these pilots who were very convinced about the dying for the emperor and the emperor system, to this complete opposite side. But then the more that you study this stuff, Japan's experience in the war, particularly 1943 onwards, a lot of soldiers were sent to these far-flung Pacific islands that they'd never heard of before to defend them, and were told beforehand that they weren't be coming back. Like, they knew that they were going to die. In Western popular culture, how many people saw the movie Letters from Iwo Jima? That might be the only real reference to it in Western culture. And let the record show that so many hands shot up in this room in excitement when I mentioned that film. But the film itself is based on the last letters home of the Lieutenant General and later General Kobayashi Tadamichi, who was writing letters home to his loved ones, his wife and children. And because he had a higher rank in the military, like, a lot of the stuff that wouldn't get through censorship was getting through. So there's a lot of these like really heartfelt letters as well. There's similar experiences basically on many of the islands that Japan occupied. And there was a particularly like gruesome battle that they had in New Guinea, where essentially the Japanese invaded and went all the way across the island. Like, they invaded an uninhabited part of the island, went all the way across to try and take over some of the cities, were defeated, and then were retreated back. And on this retreat back, thousands of them just died in the jungles. So later on, one of the names that we have here, Mizuki Shigeru, became one of the most famous like mangaka in post-war Japan. He actually lost one of his arms in New Guinea, and then created some incredible characters that like were beloved by children, but also wrote and drew some of his wartime experiences as well. In particular, he wrote a manga called Onwards Towards Our Noble Deaths, which is about his, it's partially autobiographical and is about his like retreat back across New Guinea, and is drawn in this very unique hybrid. Some of the panels are like hyper realistic, whereas other panels are drawn in like a more traditional cartoonish way. Anyway, all of these have become like my historical backdrop for what I want to do with this game, which is to make a game about these last letters home and trying to question power, remove some of those layers, and engage with that in an intriguing way. On the other side, I've also been doing research into Yūrei and Yōkai. I love Japanese ghost stories. I love Japanese monsters. I have been playing a bunch of games with ghosts and monsters in them. My younger sister and I love watching like J-horror movies, and I've always thought that would be like an intriguing way to tell a story. In my previous game, Nagasaki Kitty, it was very much like a historical backdrop, and as much as I really enjoyed making that game, I did start to notice some limitations with trying to make a historical game like that. One, trying to maintain some sort of like historical realism, and I hope that by taking like one step back from this and making something that's in a fantastical world with like ghosts and monsters, that I can better interrogate some of these historical ideas that I want to talk about. I have a bunch of references on here. There'll be a slide at the end. I'm not going to go through each source. However, one of the things that I got to do this summer was to go to the Miyoshi Mononoke Museum, which is in Miyoshi City in Hiroshima Prefecture. So this past summer, I went to do some atomic bomb research at the Peace Park in Hiroshima City. But then I was also able to get on a slow-moving country train one day and go out to Miyoshi Mononoke Museum, which turned out to be like really cool. So it is based on the basically just like the collection of this Japanese scholar who is since deceased and then donated it his collection to Miyoshi, and it's just this little like traditional buildings. There's like 4 or 5 of them there, a little courtyard just kind of in the middle of this very sleepy little town, and houses thousands of artifacts of Japanese ghosts and monsters. So I've got some like ones here that I really enjoy. The one up in the top left-hand corner is there's this type of Japanese yokai that if you have a household object that survives for 100 years, it can personify and be like gain a soul and become a monster. So this one is an umbrella. It's called a casa. I think it's called a kasagami, something along those lines. But casa means umbrella. So there's all these examples of like, this is why it's believed that you need to take really good care of your tools, because if they last for 100 years and then get abandoned, they can come back and become vengeful. Um, um, in particular, they use this monster in a game called Neo 2, and they're really, really weak monsters, but they have this attack where they like spin around in circles, and if they hit you once, it'll hit you like 7 times, and they always get me. Like you only need to hit them like once and you kill them, but these things always get me. And I've developed a bit of a love for them. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've got there are a lot of spiders, Tsuchigumo. And I just love the look on this spider's face, especially because it's like woven a full blanket to fight the samurai with. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have something that's going to be like central for me because I want to have a lot of cats in this game that I'm making. Oh, it's blocked off a little bit. I don't know that I'm going to be able to move that. That's too bad. You can just see the little kitty's face poking out there. So there's multiple types of cat yokai. This one you won't be able to see is a Bakeneko. So Bakeneko is when a cat lives like a very long life. Sometimes they can become yokai, and what will happen is their tail will split in two, and then they can start walking on their hind legs. And sometimes they can talk. So that's a Bakeneko. And then you also have a Nekomata, which would be like a werecat, which is a cat that I think that's one pretty self-explanatory. It's a werecat, you know. And in the right-hand corner here, we have a famous Japanese Yūrei. That is Okiko. There is a folk tale about a woman named Okiko who lives in she lives in a castle, and she is one of the servants in there. There's multiple different versions of this, but I'm going to tell one of the nicer ones, and then when you hear how it ends, it's an old folk tale. This stuff can be a little bit triggering. So she lives in this castle, and one of the retainers is trying to romance her, and she is refusing the overtures. One of her duties in the castle is to take care of the master's like prized plate collection, and there's 10 plates. So in some versions of the story, she breaks one of the plates. In other versions of the story, one of them is stolen by the man who's being rejected. As a way of trying to like leverage her to things. So the plate goes missing, and she's constantly counting, and she goes through, then she gets to 9 and can't find the 10th and freaks out. So she starts counting again, and on and on and on. Then when the master finds out, he either throws her down the well, or she throws herself down the well and dies. Then in the nights that follow, every single night in the middle of the night from the well, the people of the castle hear this voice counting 7, 8, 9, and then when it gets to 10, it freaks out and lets out this horrible, horrible scream. And they keep doing this until they bring in a monk who is trying to dispel the ghost. And the way that you dispel the ghost is you wait for the ghost to go 7, 8, 9, and then you say 10, and that stops the ghost from that, like placates the ghost that you have found it. So this is actually one of the more famous ghost stories in Japan. And I think, if I'm not like mistaken, they have like the well where it happened. So like one of these historical castles, you can go and see like Okiku's well. I haven't done that yet, but I might do that at some point. I mean, like, honestly, it's the hole in the ground that someone dug like 400 years ago, but still, it's a cool hole in the ground. I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit here. So these became part of my like design inspirations. So some of the things that I'll get to the video games after. I love contemporary retellings of these stories. So in manga and art, but then there's also, I found this like feminist retellings of these classic tales that I absolutely love. So in terms of manga, Mizuki Shigeru, who I mentioned before, also became this really famous mangaka for taking Japanese folklore and updating it and redrawing a lot of these monsters, to the point that experts in yokai consider him to be like one of the more important scholars or representatives or artists of yokai, even though he was writing his stuff in the like late 20th to early 21st century. And then when I was at Miyoshi, I happened to run into, they had this special art exhibition that was going on at the time in a side gallery. And the artist's name is Ishiguro Ayako. And she's a very famous artist, but I'm going to assume no one has heard of her here. Yeah, all right. Now, I hate to do this because she's a very successful artist in her own right, and I hate to be like, well, her husband is this person, but like her husband is Junji Ito. Do people know Junji Ito? Okay, there's a couple like nods. So this is I knew I recognized the name when I was going through like the little gallery, and also taking a bunch of pictures, which I wasn't supposed to be doing. And then they had to come and politely tell me to not take pictures. And I was like so embarrassed, but then I was like, no, no, this is okay. Like, I'm in the Japanese countryside, so the signs were probably in Japanese. I read Japanese, so everything's fine. And then when I was exiting in big letters in English, it's like no flash photography. And I was like, no, I just walked right by that. But afterwards, they had this this art book of Ishiguro's works, where she redrew all of the traditional or many of the famous Japanese yokai, but made them all into cats. Which to me was just like, oh, this is so cool. So she drew it in the traditional ukiyo-e style, which is from Edo era Japan, which is like late Tokugawa shogunate. So like the end of the 1500s to the 1860s, in that period. So ukiyo-e were these mass-produced like prints. Many of you have probably seen Hokusai's work, The Great Wave off of Kanagawa. So you've probably either seen a reproduction of The Great Wave, or like it's The Great Wave, but Magikarp is in it, or it's The Great Wave or Godzilla's in it. I have one of those in my office. I had one outside of my office that was just like a cat, but it was either stolen or thrown out. I don't know what happened to it. I hope it was stolen. If it was thrown out, it means the tape gave out and it fell into the garbage can. So if it was stolen, someone's at least enjoying it, which I'm good with. But these contemporary retellings and redrawings are something that I want to try and recreate in my own work. I was like, this looks really cool. I can really picture this. Then when it comes to the feminist retellings of the classic tales, I told you the story of Okiku. Matsuda Aoko wrote these stories called Where the Wild Ladies Are, which took all of these traditional Japanese folk tales and then like modernized them, or contemporized them, I guess I should say, and wrote them into like feminist retellings of the stories. So for Okiku, what happens is it's a woman who is running down, who's running this old like rundown kind of like antique shop, but like, you know, also they sell new things, and she orders these plates. And the plates get delivered to her, and she's supposed to get 10 plates, and she only gets 9. So she's sitting there counting the plates over and over and over again. And then, so the company, so she calls to complain, and the company sends this sales representative, and it's a man, and they hit it off, and they like have a pleasant romantic time together. which is a much nicer story than the story that originates from. But it takes like the essence of the story, which is about those missing plates, and then plays with it to retell it. So redrawing some of these things as cats, telling the stories to make a different point in a contemporary time, like these are inspirations to me that I'm like, okay, this is what I would like to do. Okay, but now there needs to be a video game side to it because I'm sure that I could write a story and I have to write some of these things, but I'm not going to sit down and write a short story. And I am certainly not an artist. It is a thing that I have learned. So I'm not going to draw a lot of this stuff either. But I'm thinking through in like video games, the sorts of things that I like, the story structures, the types of things that I'm actually able to design. So for narrative influences, I love the Fatal Frame series. Fatal Frame series is something that has just like taken over my entire life. During COVID in Canada, we had like really strict lockdowns. And my younger sister lived alone. I lived with my grandparents, and like the way that they had drawn up the rules is that you could only like visit within one household. Unless you lived on your own, then you could go and visit another one. So my sister would come over on weekends and we played through all of the Fatal Frame games, and I absolutely loved them. But I love the story structure. I love the ways that like they're written as curses. And I also just love the idea that it's like ghosts are real. These rituals that we perform are real, and when they go wrong, like there's hauntings that occur, and that's going to be the basis of some of the story that I write. Mirror Master Rebirth is a much less popular game, but one of my favorites. It was a PlayStation Vita game. And one of the things that they did, the original version of the game was like this samurai story. Um, but then they came out with these downloadable content, these DLC packs, where they just did different monster stories. One of them you play as a werecat, and you have to switch between three different forms. I thought that was incredible, and it's like, yeah, this is another way that we can like take the art and gamify it. And Neo 2 was the thing that kicked off my research into this field because they have lots of like really cool yokai in the game. And then after playing this game for hundreds of hours, I was like, I wonder if these yokai are actually like representative of what yokai are in Japanese culture. So I started doing research in that, being like, am I learning anything from this, or is this like a waste of my time? And then I found out every single one of the yokai in that game is taken from like an Edo area ukiyo-e print, and I was able to like go through that and go, oh, this is the good stuff. Like this is really cool. Um, One of the things that it pointed me to that I had in one of the previous slides were these yokai encyclopedias by Sekian Toriyama, which were just these mass-produced encyclopedias of yokai that were sold to people that had all drawings and everything in them and were very, very cool. In terms of design influences, basically, I'm looking to make a game that is 2D side-scrolling and is more like exploration-based. I want to do some stuff with combat, but I'll get into that in a little bit. So I played these horror games since the Cyberpunk Ghost Story, the Coma 1 and 2, and Livestream Escape from Hotel Izanami. These are all side-scrolling 2D platformers made by small, or not even platformers, just side-scrolling exploration game, all made by small groups or small companies that really inspired me. There's some things in these games that I don't like. The Sense of Cyberpunk Ghost Story has some of the art direction was very controversial at the time, and it's like it's not the best depiction in a lot of ways. But I really did enjoy playing through that game and the way that they had set it up. So those are my inspirations on like the video game side. I got some pictures here. In the top left-hand corner is this is one of the cats from Mirror Master Rebirth. So in the original version of the game, the way that the combat system works is you have to switch between three different swords, and like the swords can break, and you had to like juggle it. When you play as the cat, you have the werecat form. You have the cat form. So the werecat, you just like attack with your claws. The cat form, the cat kind of like dances in the middle of the screen and rains down other cats on people. And then you've got the demon cat form, which is a bunch of cats all run together and create this like floating disembodied head that shoots fire. And then when your meter runs out, it breaks up and all the cats run away. That cat head is actually taken from a ukiyo-e print from the 19th century as well. We got Fatal Frame up in the right. I'm doing my best not to talk about Fatal Frame because this talk will be 90 minutes of just me being like, "Oh, this game was so cool. You didn't play this, but do you remember when this happened?" Like that would be the entire talk. So I'm just gonna take a step back and say, play Fatal Frame. It's really cool. The bottom left, we have Neo 2. This particular yokai is kind of like half yokai, half ghost. It's called an ubume. And if you see the golden thing that it's holding in its hand, is in the traditional story is actually this ghost would like wander the mountains or forests, and then with a baby, and then ask passersby to hold the baby for them, and then the baby would like weigh them down into the ground, or like they would in the mountainside they would like the baby would weigh them down and they would freeze to death. In the like background of the story, it's supposed to be representative of children dying in childbirth or mothers dying in childbirth, and this like story is representative of that. But then it's also got like the thing that a lot of like folklore has of it's like, don't go into the mountains alone because it is dangerous. Like the same way how we see like a lot of like water and river monsters is really of like a lot of people drowned, and that was one of the explanations is, oh, there's monsters there. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have Sense, a Cyberpunk Ghost Story, which is just this really beyond what I would be able to do art-wise, but kind of the way that I'm thinking and moving in 2D here. All right, I'm going to blaze through these last parts so that we have a chance for questions. So why not a historical game? Why don't I just create something like I did last time? And I'm going to keep this really short. Within like historical game studies, there's this idea of talking about accuracy versus authenticity. So accuracy is what happened, and authenticity is generally what people feel like what happened or what feels right to them. And generally, gamers want to feel something that is authentic rather than necessarily accurate. And in a lot of times when we're talking about games, you probably don't want to be accurate. The example that I always used is like, nobody wants to actually play an accurate war game. Like it would be gross and dirty and disgusting, and just like you probably sit around and do nothing for 8 hours, and then there'd be like an attack for like 30 seconds, and it would be unpleasant. Like you would not want to play that. So a lot of our war games are like first person shooters, and it's just like they feel like Doom. So instead of running around shooting like demons in hell, you're running around shooting Nazis. Like that feels more authentic to people, and to the point where that's what they think of when they think of World War II. So I don't necessarily want to make something accurate here, because just adhering to the accuracy would actually not be great for my mental health, to be making a game about people being away on being sent away and writing these like horrible last letters home and knowing that they're going to die and like having to experience that. But we can get some authenticity and like talk about some of the larger issues with this. So thinking about the mortality of it, thinking about the weight of that on people who were left home. Like when we think about war, we tend to think a lot about the men who died in the war, but usually not the people who survived them: women, children, the elderly, or in this Japanese context, the absolute just like obliteration of a country and society. And there's some problems with historical games. And there's some problems with educational games in particular. Way back when I started the Nagasaki Kitty project, one of the things that we did as a team was we went to seek out historical and educational games, and so many of them are bad. So many of them are, we got a little bit of money, and so we're just going to make a 3D representation of a Japanese internment camp, and you're going to play a character, and you're going to walk around, and it's going to feel kind of like a virtual tour, and there's not going to be anything in there, and you sit there and you go like, why is this a game? But then beyond that, one of my friends makes educational board games, and we had a long discussion about like some of the pitfalls with educational games are that as soon as you label your game as educational, you cut out a huge portion of a player base, because a lot of people are used to educational games being bad and not good games and won't play them. So I'm experimenting with this idea, thinking that if I make like a detective ghost game where you play as a detective and you go to this island and you engage with a bunch of cats who are going to help you try and solve the mystery of these ghosts, and then to tie that to some of the history of like how this has been, how this happened. I think that that'll be more engaging and perhaps reach a different audience, a larger audience, like people who need to be engaged by these sorts of things. So, as I said, I had some abandoned prototypes with this. The first design pitch with this, I found the paper, because the first thing that I do is I get one sheet of lined paper and I go front to back and just like write my pitch to myself of like what I want to make. So a little bit of story, a little bit of character, settings, tools that I'm going to use, like works that are inspiring me. And I always put my name on it and I always label it with the date that I do it. So I found the first one. The code name for it was called Without Mercy, and it was the 21st of February 2021, and did not progress past the concept stage. Without Mercy is actually a very nerdy reference to a history book by John Dower called War Without Mercy, about propaganda during World War II. So it sounds really like tough, but it's the geekiest thing possible. A lot of the stuff that I like wrote down here, including like the concept of like what the player is going to be doing, what I want the game to be about, did survive, but it wasn't until my second design pitch for myself in January 19th, 2023. I changed the name to Conclusion and Clarity, and did version 1. This one I did actually do some work on. I did some early artwork, and I was going to implement character. So the idea for that one, it wasn't going to be a detective game. It was going to be an island that had fallen in this kind of like cyberpunky world, and you get sent in as this little robot to try and find out what's happened to this military base. And instead of finding any survivors, you find all the last letters home and piece it together. So this is Deployable Automaton Vanguard Explorer was his name, Dave. And I did my early like little sketches and drawings of like who he was and how I wanted him to work. And then I did some early like implementation. So I went and found that I drew like a non-shaded, non-detailed pixel art version of Dave. And then implemented him into RPG Maker MV to get him to move around. But I forgot this when I did it, is that I didn't even do like the full pixel sheet. So I've got him that he can walk left and right, but when he moves up and down, it just turns into these black arrows, these poorly drawn black arrows. And I was like, oh yeah, I just didn't finish that implementation. So that's how far that I got with that. And now we're going into our third version of it. I'm gonna save Dave for something else. Dave's gonna make an appearance at some point. But one of the people that I'm going to be co-writing and working on this with is like a world expert in Japanese detective fiction. So she's going to help me write the main character and also translate this game, hopefully. So that's when the detectiveness comes in. I haven't decided if it's going to be a detective cat. It might end up being a detective cat, but that might be a bridge too far. This, I think I am going to cut so that we have time for questions. Basically, what I want to do is create a world of characters. And one of the things that I am starting out with is I'm writing a curse, a Fatal Frame-esque curse of how this haunting happens and how the way that it works. In general, it's going to be called the Letter Writer's Curse. And the idea is that when two people are apart and write letters to each other, it creates a bond. And when the two of them die, they can be like drawn together. But they're going to get drawn together, and this is going to actually cause the haunting because of all of like the death and destruction that has happened on this island. So still working out exactly how I'm going to word it, how it's going to work, and how I would want to implement that. But that's my general idea for our story. When I made Nagasaki Kitty, the thing that I found that was so great was to do iterative design. So I did a Twine version of the game that was really simple, a Twine version with the team. I did an RPG Maker version, and then I did a translation version. And then after that, learning RPG Maker a little bit more, we did like our enhanced edition. So I'm going to try and replicate that this time, where I'm going to start in a simple tool that I already know. So I want to do an RPG Maker version. It probably won't be MV, it might be MZ, but it could also be RPG Maker Unite. But I don't know about the Unity underlyingness to that. Like I'm kind of like have some trepidation about actually using that tool. But it will be an RPG Maker version, so it can be quick. That I can go through the story for mainly so I can develop that story and the proof of concept. A second version would be to translate the game and do a little bit of a gameplay expansion, also in RPG Maker. And then my long-term goal, when I step up to make like the more sophisticated version, would be to be using Godot. So I'm working on a Godot game with some of my students from last semester in my project studio, where myself and two of my colleagues from Tubba Game Manufacturing Concern, which is the name of my itch artist collective, are working with them to expand a game that they made in Godot, and we're going to use this as skills, so particularly for me, so I can do this fully realized version. For the YouTube version, I'm just going to pause on this for like 5 seconds. These are all the references. All right, thank you very much.